I found this. I was going to wear it, but I don't think I fit in it anymore. But I found my very thin and washed out, celebrating 5 years of active resistance Seneca Women's Peace Camp shirt. And this was the shirt that I always wore when I did actions, too. It's Saturday, October 13th, I think. And we're in Oakland, California, and it's been almost 20 years since I have seen you. Yeah. I was living in Ohio, in Columbus, and some of the women that I volunteered with at the Rape Crisis Center, and a lot of us were doing anti-violence work and CD work in Ohio, and some of the women that I was connected with were talking about Greenham and then talking about Seneca, and I don't know, I was maybe 21, 22. It wouldn't have occurred to me, but yeah, I had heard about it, and it was big. I mean, I knew it was big, and I heard women who were coming back from there and talking about how incredible it was, and I was still young in my activism at the time, trying to put together the pieces between socialism and feminism and spirituality and sacred and who I was as. I was still. It was very foreign. So and then I remember Loba was the one who at the time was Raquel who said later, several years later, when we were all doing actions together, let's go to the camp, and she had been at Peace Camp. I think I recall a little bit of everything. I remember being enchanted, and I remember being struck by a lot of the chaos, and it was an exciting time. It was an exciting time to see some of the work that was being done, and to feel like there was support for it. Because a lot of the work that I had been doing, I had felt like I didn't have as much support. So I think there was a way in which, even though it was chaotic, I felt like there was a coming home. Well, I think at the time that I first came, it was for some sort of gathering. And so the first time was a short visit for a few weeks. And then the first time I think I had gone to the Michigan Festival afterward, and there was a lot of energy and there were a lot of women, and I don't quite remember what the gathering was, although I'm sure it was something around trashing something. And the next time I came to live there for a while, and there weren't a lot of women there, and it was the regular day-to-day, and the gatherings of women depended either on events that we were organizing or that it was a weekend. And I always looked forward, especially because at some points in it, it was just me and you and Valerie, and we always looked forward to the time where some of the core women were going to be coming and we could get some work done. But a good deal of it was people straggling in and out and trying to keep things going and trying to keep money coming in and trying to keep the grass down and trying to fix bullet holes in the water tank and fixing the boardwalk and tying tampons on the fence. Regular day-to-day stuff. Yeah, no, I remember learning a lot of things, and I specifically remember some workshop that Woody Blue had done on the concept of there being, what was it? It was somewhere in there was something about fulcrums, and that there were three, if you wanted to understand how to work on a lot of different structures, that there were three basic concepts that if you understood them, you would understand how the workings of different things went. And I learned massive amount of stuff. And some of it I think was also, some of it was learning and some of it was being given permission to use the skills that I had been given too, because I grew up with, a father who actually did give me permission to learn, carpentry and to learn physical skills. But yeah, I learned how to cut grass from you with that funky little scythe. That was fun. And I learned a lot of stuff. I learned how to pee in a bucket. That was cool. I learned a lot of things, and I got to strengthen skills that I don't think I really realized I had. And it was empowering.
Did you do actions while you were at the camp?
No, I never did.
Really?
I had come there actually to the peace camp after spending about 4 months fighting some charges of trashing a porn shop in Ohio. And ironically, I don't know what I was thinking. I came there to get a break from things that I was doing in Ohio, and somehow had some delusions of grandeur that it was going to be more restful. And we did a lot of incredible actions, and I can talk about the actions that we did, but the one piece that I want to say that was significantly powerful for me is that there was a way in which the political action that I was doing before I went to the peace camp was disconnected. There was a way in which it was about acting out, and there was a way in which it was about I want to say a little bit self-absorbed, and a little bit my youth was very much a part of the action that I did at the time. And when I came to the peace camp, one of the things that was really powerful was in the connecting between developing sacred practice and doing ritual much of the time with you, and connecting with holy. I don't think I would have had the words for it at the time. There was a way in which it helped me get clear on what it was that I was doing when we were doing direct action. And I think that was a piece that was the most powerful part of it, is that it shifted my work, my peace work, from something that was simply drawn from my own personal pain and my own desire to act out and to be in drama, to something that was really connected with a vision and connected with the sacred. So yeah, we did incredible work. We did incredible actions. I think, I was a little bit more cautious, obviously. I mean, I shouldn't say obviously. I was quite a bit more cautious than a lot of the other women, because I knew my limits as far as what I was willing to deal with as far as criminal charges, because I knew at some point I was going to be working more as a social worker, and I knew it would affect my work if I had too many too many criminal charges. So I got arrested several times there, or detained several times at the Army Depot. But what was more empowering was getting to teach the women who were coming through there how to do action, and how to keep clear on what it was that they were doing, and how to stay connected with the people around them, and to stay connected with themselves instead of getting drawn into all of the energy around. Some of the action that we did was at the Peace Camp. And I remember one of them that was really powerful, and you were there, was a Mother's Day action that we did. And we were talking to some of the people that were working, they were, what do they call it, non-com, right? They were locals who worked at the depot, who were keeping us at bay when we were doing some sort of Mother's Day presents at the fence, and a lot of the local women had come. There was a guy who, I think he was talking to you. I think the piece that I remember is we were talking with some of the people, at the fence, saying, look at what's happening to people's health here. Look at what's happening, look at what's happening around the world. These nuclear missiles are affecting mothers' children, And I remember at one point, one of the guys, I think, took you aside and said, my mother died of cancer. And I think you asked him, did your mother live here in Romulus? And he said, yeah. And he said, I know her health was affected by this Army Depot and all of the toxins here. And I remember it was just this moment where what we were doing felt really clear, that it wasn't just about coming up against, that it was actually around making connections with people and having the opportunity to support people around thinking about creating something different.
Okay.
Oh God, there were like a lot of actions that I remember. There were always the ones with the carpet, the proverbial piece of carpet over the barbed wire, and there were always I think the one I remember most was the one tying the bloody little tampons all over the fence and watching the military guys as we were finally leaving there going, and I remember pulling them out and tying them, and they were going, oh geez, what are we going to do with that? And going by there a few days later and several days later after that, and they were still there because nobody wanted to go near them. And I remember a lot of different actions that we did there, a lot that were around healing our own pain too, and a lot of women who were coming there in their pain and doing a lot of work around supporting women whose connection to Peace Camp was also around their own healing from violence, and some of it involving some of the work that was being done on the land, and culminating with going to the fence and I think some sense of empowerment that women had in having support and being able to keen and be able to rage around what they'd been holding in and what they wanted to speak out against and what they wanted to see. So there were a lot of different times over that period of, I don't know, was it like 8-9 months that I was there? I don't even know how long it was. But there were a lot of actions that were going on over, little ones sometimes. Sometimes they were just little revolts.
Do you remember an action around a battered woman who was killed?
I do. That wasn't at the camp, though. That was us going out and supporting a woman in a battered women's shelter that was in the community nearby, and that was very sad.
Yeah.
I do remember that. You and I and some other women had done some work, and I think a lot of it is we had been doing some healing work ourselves, too, around our own pain. And there had been a lot of women coming through the camp to heal their pain, of course, which sometimes made things hard and sometimes made things crazy. And there was a woman that had gone to one of the battered women's shelters in the area, and she had gotten some support, and then I think she went back to her husband, and he assaulted her again, and she went to go back there, several months later for support, and it was closed down, I think. The county had decided that they didn't have enough funds to keep the battered women's shelter open, and so she went back home and got killed. Yeah. And we did an action at the where it was, or at the county building or something, in as a way of speaking out in support of them re-evaluating, the decision to close it. And there was a lot of, I would guess there was probably about maybe 30 women at the time. I don't recall, but I remember that the night before we had done a ritual on the land, and we had done a ritual around visualizing the powers not having power over us, and the ability to release from those powers, and to release ourselves from ways that we were being held. And I don't think it was as specific as handcuffs, but we certainly used that analogy and metaphor as far as being able to dissolve their power. And I remember being handcuffed to some desk, and somehow I just used that visualization and slipped out of the handcuffs. And when they finally went to take me away, I handed the guy the handcuffs along with a get-out-of-jail-free card, and he wasn't too pleased with that. But yeah, it was empowering, and it was sad. And there was a way in which, in all of the sadness, there was some power also in being able to bring humor in with pain, because all of us knew the pain. I mean, a lot of us had worked with battered women. A lot of us had been hurt, in many ways. And I certainly came there after working with rape crisis for years, and it was painful.
Had you lived in women's community before you came to the peace camp?
I hadn't. I had practically only because I was involved in one of those typical collectives where you stayed up until 4 a.m. processing until you finished it. So it felt like I had been living in women's community, but I hadn't. I actually, I came out around peace camp, and then I felt I had been living with a guy before I came to peace camp, but all of my friends were dykes, and all of us were doing peace work in my living room, and he was always kind of being sequestered out in the backyard because we didn't let him. So my world was definitely community, but that was the first time that I ever lived on land and with community.
And in that group, had you worked with consensus?
Yes. Yeah, that's why we sat up until 4 a.m.
Okay.
Yes, but the process of consensus was different at the peace camp, because what was challenging around it is that the players were changing so frequently that one process that happened one week would get overturned when another crew came in another week and would sit down, and that part was a challenge. It required a respect for the expanse of who had a voice, and not getting stuck in, well, so-and-so should have more of a voice because so-and-so is living there more or did more or knows more, or, and how do you do that when some people are passing faces and some people are carrying a lot of weight? And that was a challenge, and I don't know if if that part was ever easy or clear how to deal with that challenge.
Do you think that it was somewhat successful as far as sticking to consensus, or totally chaotic?
Both.
Yep.
It depended on the day. It depended on the day, and it was painful many times, but what was true was there was passion, and there was fire, and there was heart. I mean, even if sometimes the discussions ended up in explosions. In looking back, what I appreciated was the depth of intention. There were times where I learned a lot. I mean, I particularly learned a lot when, especially from Woody Blue, I did, around holding process. And I remember always being really relieved when Woody would come and there would be a meeting with Woody there, because she always had a certain kind of, held a certain kind of ability to balance and to hear people, and I appreciated that. It was the first year that the AIDS quilt had been taken out at the gay march on Washington, and at that time it was still small, not smaller, not like it is now, and it was right following the Hardwick decision by the Supreme Court, Bowers versus Hardwick, where two men had been jailed for sodomy, and the Supreme Court upheld that decision. And as usual, we carted off a bunch of us to raise holy hell and teach civil disobedience for that march. And a lot of us were doing the preparation for the CD because we'd been doing it for so long. So there we were in DC trying to deal with people who had never done CD, and a lot of which had very different ideas about what it meant to get arrested. Did it mean that you stuck in there, or did it mean that you pulled out your credit card? And I think there were about 300 of us that got arrested on the Supreme Court steps for refusing to leave. And Michelle Crone had led the training for the CD, and a lot of the women that had been such a strong part of the Peace Camp were a central part of that. And I think we spent about 3.5 days getting carted around to different jails. And I do remember one part of this, several parts of it, one of which is very humorous, which is that right before the CD, I had been at Michigan, and we were all rallying around anti-SM because we were very righteous at the time about our insistence that all SM was violence to women, and we had converged on some SM group at Michigan Festival, and there was a very intense woman who was part of the SM group who had then converged on our recovering from sexual abuse group at the Michigan Festival, and she was this very scary big butch leather, lots of scary things about her at the time. And she had a big wooden stick and lots of leather, and she converged on us, and she looked very big and scary. And then when we were in jail in D.C., at one of the points, they decided to foot cuff us. And then all of a sudden I looked at who they were foot cuffing me to, and it was that woman. And she wasn't as scary because she was crying, and I kept having to console her, and this big scary butch top leather daddy was this big wuss who was having a meltdown, and I was cuffed to her and just praying she didn't know who I was. Yeah, and I remember being really proud of the Peace Camp women during that, because I remember that it was a very charged time, and they were really trying to push us to our limit, and they were tossing us around and throwing us from one jail to another. And one point, I think they put us on some cement slab floor that smelled of pee, and you were in pain. And you were in a lot of pain, and we had to figure out how to calm everybody in this squashed cell so that you could get some support. And I remember at one point everybody having to move to the side, and everybody was starting to freak out, and Peace Camp women were really central in helping people to stay centered and stay calm and stay clear and stay true to process and hear people when people were really starting to unravel. And I felt proud of what we had taught each other, and that we took care of each other in that, even when people were starting to fray and buckle a bit. People hadn't eaten for several days. I think they had handed us bologna sandwiches, so we hadn't eaten because it was disgusting. None of us ate meat. So yeah, I remember that very, very well. And I remember I ended up, somebody sent me a calendar pinup because I ended up in some calendar being dragged away by all these cops in riot gear with my shirt pulled up over my titties, and they were dragging me. And just FYI, my gay brother ended up using that picture later to out me to my family, which was pretty funny. Yeah, that was a period of time. Oh, well, the pinnacle line was, because I had kept it hidden, and he was actually at the march, and I had gone up to some of the women in his group and said, "Are you aware that he's a predator? And if you have children, you need to know that he's a predator," because he was a big part of a gay Jewish group that had gone to that march. And so he was pissed at me. And so my mom was in tears when she saw the picture of me with my breasts all over the place and cops in riot gear, and wanted to know where she had gone wrong. And so that was when I finally had to out my brother. And I said, "Well, Mom, it's okay. You didn't do anything wrong. It's like this. I'm gay, I'm lesbian because I love women. And my brother Barry is gay because he hates women. Do you understand that, Mom?" And that was painful, but at the time I was humored by it. Yeah. I want to tell you about what my experience was in contemplating coming here today, which is I had a lot of thoughts about some of the challenging memories of living on land and living particularly at the Peace Camp. And part of it was remembering also the pain of the rhetoric. And I have a lot more compassion about the rhetoric now and how we were all growing, and we were all growing up, and as much as we we talked about celebrating difference and supporting and cherishing difference, there was a lot of acting from fear. And I always struggled with the pain of knowing that there were many women who regarded me as a sellout. And some of the sellout was that I didn't necessarily do downward mobility, and I wasn't a separatist, and I had also worked in the mental health system, and I didn't necessarily believe some of the thought that was sort of the assumed law, which was that whole system is fucked up. And particularly when a lot of women were coming to the camp to heal, and there was a lot of wounds running around, and I was really clear that some of it was really clearly some women needing some mental health. And, you know, God forbid you say that, then you are part of the system and you are in big trouble. You know, where I was really empowered in so many ways that I see today. I'm a social worker now. That's what I do. I work with Child Protective Services, and I still deal with violence every day and people healing from violence, and I've been doing it for years. I am so aware of the ways in which the Peace Camp informed how I approach things. And I have other workers who say, it seems like you've done some other work than we've done. And I know that what we did really impacts how I work with people and how I bring a politic to it that's very different. There was an incredible amount of empowerment that came to that, but there was also a lot of healing that had to come from leaving the Peace Camp and a lot of the rhetoric too. And so at some point I moved to San Francisco, and I brought my steel toe boots with me and my attempt at androgyny, and bumped into Casey Fisher and several other dykes out here who wouldn't have any part of my rhetoric about androgyny, and they were cracking up laughing when I said that butch femme was, you know, a construct of, you know, heterosexual patriarchy and la la la. And I remember Casey, who's a dyke out here, and she said, "What, are you trying to tell me you're androgynous?" And, you know, I guess even with my short haircut and steel-toed boots, I wasn't really pulling it off, but there really wasn't permission at the Peace Camp for there to be any divergence in a lot of ways. And so there was the powerful coming out in a lot of ways in leaving the Peace Camp and in leaving those narrow margins that was also healing, coming out as a femme and understanding sexuality in much more broad ways than I did when I lived at the Peace Camp. So albeit we were there to do peace work, but we were doing obviously so much more. And so this morning when I was putting on makeup, I was actually thinking, okay, am I going to deal with rolled eyes when I walk in there? And I could not put on makeup, and no, I'm fucking going to do it. And they're just going to have to fucking deal with it. And I appreciated the passion, even as we were, you know, I appreciate it now in retrospect that we were all doing our best, and I was just as single-minded about a whole lot of stuff that now I laugh at. You know, I had come there with Raquel. Both of us had been involved with doing a lot of social justice work together. My first arrest was with Loba in Columbus, but it was at both of our first arrest at a federal building in Ohio when the four nuns, I think, when the four nuns were murdered. Some of the more PC than thou stuff came up later when Loba decided that me being a dyke wasn't enough, that if I was not separatist, then I was I was a sellout, and so she wouldn't talk to me when she would come to the camp. And I think she was also mad because I didn't like her dropping off Chantal and Olga everywhere, and doing rhetoric to say that everybody was responsible for them because she was a woman of color. And yeah, it was a time. The first time we got arrested, and Olga was having a hard time getting it together to get dressed and finish her cereal, and Raquel said, "Honey, there are children in Central America that are dying. Would you come on?" And I was like, "Raquel, leave her alone." But we all took ourselves very seriously at the time. And I also remember, this is a really bad digression, but I remember at one point Olga was watching some TV show about children in Africa, and all of a sudden, in her Olga way, said, "It's always the children that suffer. They suffer and they suffer." And I'm like, "Raquel, you gotta get these kids out more." I think what I appreciate most is that when I hold compassion around that rhetoric and what was behind it, I have much more compassion for my own process, which has sometimes been really black and white, and so I just have a certain feeling of sweetness even around that piece too, although at the time it was hard. It's incredible. It was an incredible period of time. I was sad when I found out that the land had been lost. I remembered the orchard, and I remembered how you tended it. And I think that part made me the most sad, was knowing there were women's ashes there, and trying to envision, carrying their ashes on our backs, that they didn't just lay there.
Are there regrets that you have about the peace camp?
I don't know if there are regrets, but there was the piece that was always the frustration, was that there were a lot of women who were coming through there who didn't quite understand the work that was needed. And if I was to engage my own rhetoric, I think that there was a certain amount of frustration that people wanted to come there but didn't really want to do some of the work that was involved in sustaining it. But ironically, I guess I came there with that idea too. And I remember just the frustration when people would come through and feeling a sense of hope, like, oh, maybe they'll help out with this project that we have on our hands, and then realizing that they were spending the weekend fucking their brains out in a bender, and it was like, okay, I guess they're not going to help us with this. So that part was always hard, because I think, like women's bookstores or anything else, women like the idea of it, but I think it became too easy to lose perspective on how our work was needed to keep it going. And I certainly only experienced it for a short period of time, and I can only imagine how you guys felt that, the frustration, because you really, kept it going and held out and held on when people, I just admired it.
Do you remember doing magic around trying to get that down?
I do. I remember doing magic with you, and I remember dancing naked, trying to bring women to come. And I seem to think that it was raining too, Estelle. We did a lot of magic. I mean, I remember a lot of magic that was done to heal, and I remember Okay, I also remember walking on hot coals. Did I really do that? Did I really do that? I really did that.
You did.
I really did that. But I do remember that one time in particular where we were feeling desperate. And I remember it had waned down and we hadn't seen people come in weeks. And I remember doing a ritual with you and Valerie and myself, and there was something in the circle around taking ashes and painting each other's bodies, something. It was very sweet and loving. And then I remember right after that, like within a couple of days, there was this convergence of women that all of a sudden appeared. And it was fascinating because we were so manifesting it.
I remember it happening that same day.
Was it really?
Suddenly the motorcycles started coming in and cars.
I remember, and I remember us crying, going, "Oh my God!"
Yeah.
And
Feeling magic.
I carry that magic with me, and I carry that connection as sacred as it holds me in my work today, and I really appreciate that because I was never a very trusting person. And it opened that up to me that there is no way to manifest without that kind of opening and without that kind of abject faith. And I really appreciated the lessons that I learned. You were a big piece of that. You were a big piece of teaching me that opening.
Have you maintained relationships with women from those days?
I haven't. I think the only person that I used to see Helen until she moved out, and I used to see Lindsay, except for I think Lindsay decided that I was a corrupt person of privilege because I went to graduate school and was a part of the system, and God help me, Lindsay, if you see this, and. For a while I did. There was, when I was first here, and there were lots of women with speculums in their crotches in my living room, the first couple of years that I lived here. And I haven't, but this connecting around this has renewed connection with Woody that we had lost. We had talked to him maybe about 10 years ago. She had came to San Francisco. And it's kind of renewed reminded me. And I'm hoping that I won't lose contact with some of those people. Yeah, that was a big piece of what was happening at the time. I think that it may have even been the reason the radiation zapping that had first started, I think, in Greenham, and then started happening at the Peace Camp that women were experiencing, especially when there were shipments going in and out on the depot. And I remember there was one woman who had burns on her body. And I remember a lot of women dealing with exhaustion and nausea at certain times. And I think that was a big piece also of why a lot of women were avoiding coming. And I think the other part is that there were other women that were beginning to think that we were paranoid psycho when we were speaking and saying this is what's happening, and that was really hard. That was really hard. The people, and I understand it. I mean, it sounds psycho, other than it happened, and we knew it happened, and we had, I think at one point we had somebody who came and had verified it at Greenham that had come to the Peace Camp and actually did some tests of some sort of assessment, who was a scientist who had clearly confirmed what we had been saying, but nonetheless we still sounded like psychos. And I remember Valerie and I and you, I mean, you were dealing with a lot of pain at the time, but I remember being exhausted a lot there in ways that I never felt exhausted. And very clearly, at one point we were keeping journals, and we could see that there was some consistency of when, we were feeling it and what was going on. And of course, we always could get some sense of what was going on at the depot because the helicopters were always flying lower to intimidate us, to keep track of what we were doing when things were going in and out. And I forgot about that. Why did I forget about that? Because it's so psycho. It seemed psycho. No, I moved out here, and I never went back. And when I saw that there had been some gatherings before, I had called you at one time when it went to a land trust, and I called you on the land. I don't know how long ago that was, and talked to you briefly, but I never went back. And part of it is, it's hard to motivate to afford a trip to, and knowing that it was kind of diminishing and dwindling and not knowing who was there. But now I wish I had. I do. And because I don't think I ever got the goodbye with the land. And that part I regret.